Have you ever believed in someone's dream enough to invest your money and your trust only to watch them disappear the moment they didn't need you anymore? Hit that subscribe button. Like and comment if you believe that people who ghost you after taking your resources eventually come crawling back when they need you again. Because what I'm about to tell you proves that sometimes the person who vanished from your life reappears exactly when you have the power to make or break their future. My name is Indy. I'm 33 years old. And the day the man who ghosted me after I invested $50,000 in his startup walked into my venture capital firm asking for funding was the day I finally understood that patience isn't passive. It's predatory. But before I tell you about that pitch meeting where he finally recognized me, let me take you back to where trust died and strategy was born, because every story of vindication starts with someone treating you like you're disposable. I met Sterling when I was 27 years old at a startup founder meetup in Austin. I'd recently sold a small e-commerce business I'd built during college for $120,000. It wasn't enough to retire, but it was enough to give me options and the confidence that I could build valuable things from scratch. Dash was 29, attractive in that effortless way some men are, and pitching an idea for a mobile app that connected freelance workers with short-term gigs in the service industry. Think Uber but for handymen, caterers, event staff, any skilled worker who wants flexible employment. The concept was solid. The gig economy was exploding, and Dash had identified a genuine market need. He was charismatic when he pitched, making eye contact with everyone in the room and speaking with a kind of conviction that made you believe he could actually execute on this vision. After the meetup, I approached him to discuss his business model. Your pitch was compelling, I said, introducing myself. Mindy. I just exited a small business and I'm looking for interesting investment opportunities. Tell me more about your traction. Dash lit up immediately. We launched a beta version 3 months ago in Austin, he explained. We have about 200 workers signed up and 50 businesses using the platform regularly. The feedback is incredible. People love the flexibility and the quality of workers we're vetting. What's your biggest challenge right now? I asked. Funding, he said bluntly. I bootstrapped the beta with savings and credit cards, but I need capital to build out the technology properly, hire a marketing person, and expand to other cities. How much are you looking to raise? I asked. $75,000, he replied. That would get us through the next 9 months and prove we can scale beyond Austin. We exchanged contact information and agreed to meet for coffee later that week to discuss the opportunity in detail. Over the next month, Dash and I met several times. He showed me detailed financials, user metrics, and growth projections. Everything looked promising. More than that, Dash seemed genuinely passionate about solving a real problem. He talked about workers he'd met who struggled to find consistent employment, about small businesses that needed reliable help but couldn't afford full-time staff. His mission felt authentic, not just about making money but about creating opportunities. I also found myself attracted to him, though I tried to keep that separate from the business evaluation. Dash was charming, attentive, and had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the conversation. When he talked about his vision for the company, he'd include me in the future tense. When we expand to other cities, when we raise our Series A, when we build this into something massive. Then we made it feel like a partnership even before I'd invested $1. After a month of due diligence, I made my decision. I'd invest $50,000 for a 12% equity stake in the company, officially called Task Force. It was more than half my liquid assets, but I believed in the opportunity and in Dash's ability to execute. We formalized the investment through a simple agreement drafted by a startup lawyer Dash knew. The terms were straightforward. 12% equity, standard investor protections, and a board observer seat that would let me attend meetings and provide input without formal voting authority. The day I wired the $50,000, Dash took me to dinner to celebrate. This is going to be incredible, he said, raising his glass. You're not just an investor, Indy. You're a partner in building something that matters. I believed him completely. For the first 3 months after my investment, everything seemed perfect. Dash sent regular updates about hiring progress, technology development, and user growth. Task Force expanded from Austin to Dallas and Houston. The worker count grew from 200 to 800. Revenue climbed from a few $1,000s monthly to over $20,000. Every metric was moving in the right direction. Dash and I would meet weekly to discuss strategy. He valued my input, asked thoughtful questions about my e-commerce experience, and made me feel like a genuine contributor beyond just capital. We also started spending time together outside of business meetings. Coffee would turn into lunch. Strategy sessions would extend into dinner. The line between professional and personal began blurring in ways that felt natural and exciting. 6 months after my investment, Dash and I started dating officially. Felt like everything was aligning perfectly. A promising business investment, a romantic relationship with someone ambitious and driven, a future that included both financial success and personal happiness. I was careful to maintain professional boundaries around the business, but I won't pretend the romantic relationship didn't make me more trusting and less vigilant about oversight. Then, about 8 months after my investment, things started changing. Dash's updates became less frequent. When we'd meet, he'd be distracted, checking his phone constantly and cutting conversations short, claiming he had urgent business to handle. Our romantic relationship cooled as well. He'd cancel dates last minute, would be too tired for meaningful conversations, and seemed generally distant in ways that made me anxious. When I asked what was wrong, he'd blame stress from scaling the business. "It's just growing pains," he'd say. "I'm stretched thin trying to manage everything. Give me some space to handle this and things will normalize." I gave him space, despite my instincts screaming that something was wrong. I trusted him both as my investment partner and my boyfriend. That trust was a mistake. 10 months after my investment, Dash stopped responding to my messages entirely. Texts went unanswered. Emails were ignored. Phone calls went to voicemail that was never returned. I tried for 2 weeks to reach him before panic set in. I drove to Task Force's office, a small space in a co-working facility. The receptionist told me the company had moved out 3 weeks earlier. No forwarding address provided. I felt my stomach drop. I checked Task Force's website. It was still active, still showing the app was available, but there was no contact information and no way to reach Dash. I tried contacting the other early employees I'd met. None of them responded. It was like Dash and the entire company had vanished. I hired a lawyer to track down what had happened. What she discovered was devastating. Dash had raised additional funding from other investors without telling me. He'd moved the company to San Francisco and restructured the business entity in a way that significantly diluted my equity. My 12% stake was now worth less than 3% due to how the new funding was structured. Technically, everything he'd done was legal based on the investment agreement I'd signed. The agreement had given him broad authority to raise additional capital and issue new shares. I'd trusted the document his lawyer drafted without having my own attorney review it carefully. That trust had cost me both my investment value and apparently my relationship. "Can I sue him?" I asked my lawyer desperately. "For what?" she replied gently. "Breach of contract. He followed the terms you agreed to. Fraud. You'd need to prove he intentionally deceived you from the beginning, which is nearly impossible. Bad faith. That's not a legal claim. Dash didn't do anything illegal. He just did something really crappy to someone who trusted him." I sat in her office feeling like the biggest fool in the world. I'd invested $50,000 and fallen in love with someone who'd used both my money and my emotions to build something, then disappeared the moment he didn't need me anymore. For the next year I was angry, hurt, and determined to never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I used my remaining capital to start consulting for early-stage startups, helping founders with growth strategy and business development. I was good at it and word spread quickly. Within 18 months, I had more client work than I could handle. I hired 2 other consultants and formalized the practice into a small advisory firm called Catalyst Strategy Group. We specialized in helping founders scale from idea to product market fit, exactly the phase where Dash had needed help and where I'd learned hard lessons. 3 years after Dash ghosted me, I'd built Catalyst Strategy Group into a respected firm with 15 employees and annual revenue exceeding $2 million. I'd also started angel investing again, carefully this time, with proper legal documentation and much more skepticism about founder promises. I invested in 8 companies over those 3 years, all of which were performing well. My reputation in the Austin startup community grew. People knew me as someone who was smart, strategic, and tough in negotiations. I'd learned from being taken advantage of, and I never let it happen again. Then I got an opportunity that changed everything. A venture capital firm called Summit Ventures approached me about joining as a partner. They'd been watching my advisory work and angel investments. They were impressed with my track record and wanted someone who understood early-stage companies from personal experience. The offer was substantial. Base salary of $200,000 plus carried interest in the funds I'd manage. I'd be responsible for sourcing deals, conducting due diligence, and managing a portfolio of investments in consumer technology startups. Accepted immediately. Within 6 months at Summit Ventures, I'd led 3 investments that were performing exceptionally well. My partners trusted my judgment, and I had real authority to make investment decisions. I was finally in a position of power in the startup ecosystem, the kind of power I'd lacked when Dash had taken advantage of me. One Tuesday morning, my assistant knocked on my office door. "You have a pitch meeting scheduled for 2 this afternoon," she said, checking her tablet. "Company called Task Force Connect, seeking Series B funding. They're in the gig economy space." My heart stopped. Task Force Connect was obviously related to Dash's original task force. The timing was right for a Series B. Industry matched. Had to be him. "Send me their pitch deck and any materials they submitted," I said, keeping my voice level. My assistant left and I pulled up everything I could find about Task Force Connect online. The company had indeed grown significantly. They were now in 20 cities, had over 50,000 workers on the platform, and were doing approximately $30 million in annual revenue. The leadership page showed Dash as founder and CEO. Seeing his face on my computer screen after 4 years brought back a flood of emotions. Anger, hurt, and underneath it all, a cold satisfaction that he was about to walk into my office having no idea who'd be sitting across from him. I spent the next several hours preparing. I reviewed their financials, analyzed their growth metrics, and identified every weakness in their business model. By the time 2 o'clock arrived, I knew more about Task Force Connect's vulnerabilities than Dash probably did. My assistant showed Dash and his CFO into the conference room. I was already seated at the head of the table, positioned so I'd see their faces when they walked in. Dash entered first, confident and polished in an expensive suit. He looked older, more sophisticated than the founder I'd met 4 years ago. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face. His steps faltered. He actually stopped walking for a moment, his mouth opening in shock. "Indy," he said, my name coming out like a question. "Hello, Dash," I replied calmly. "Please sit down. Let's hear your pitch." He sat slowly, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His CFO, a woman named Simone who clearly had no idea what was happening, looked between us with confusion. "Do you two know each other?" she asked. "We have history," I said, not taking my eyes off Dash. "Mr. Sterling took an investment from me years ago. Before he moved the company and restructured in ways that diluted my equity to almost nothing. Then he ghosted me completely." Simone's eyes widened. Dash's face went from pale to red. "That was a different phase of the company," he said, his voice tight. "The business evolved. I made decisions that were necessary for growth. Without consulting or even informing your early investor," I said. "The investor who believed in you when you had 200 users and were maxing out credit cards. That investor." Dash didn't respond. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Should we reschedule this meeting?" Simone finally asked. "No," I said, my tone professional. "I'm here to evaluate an investment opportunity. Let's see the pitch." For the next hour, Dash and Simone presented Task Force Connect's business. The numbers were genuinely impressive. They'd scaled significantly, built strong unit economics, and had a clear path to profitability. Under any other circumstances, this would be an attractive investment. But circumstances weren't normal. Throughout the presentation, Dash kept glancing at me nervously. He stumbled over parts of the pitch he'd probably delivered flawlessly dozens of times. He knew he was completely at my mercy. When they finished, I asked detailed questions about their financials, their competitive positioning, and their plans for the capital they were raising. Simone answered most of them competently. Dash barely spoke, clearly rattled by the situation. Finally, I leaned back in my chair. "This is an interesting opportunity," I said. "But I have significant concerns about leadership and judgment. Mr. Sterling has a history of treating early supporters poorly, making decisions without consulting stakeholders, and generally prioritizing his own interests over fiduciary responsibilities to investors. Those are serious red flags." Indy Dash started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "However, Summit Ventures doesn't make investment decisions based on personal history. We evaluate opportunities objectively. I'll discuss this with my partners and will let you know our decision within 2 weeks." Dash looked like he wanted to say something, to explain or apologize, but Simone was already gathering materials and standing to leave. "Thank you for your time," she said professionally, clearly trying to end an awkward situation. After they left, I sat alone in the conference room feeling a strange mix of emotions. Seeing Dash again had brought back all the hurt and anger from 4 years ago. But it had also shown me how much had changed. I wasn't the naive investor who'd trusted blindly anymore. I was a venture capital partner with the power to make or break his fundraising round. Over the next week, I did something Dash had never done for me. I conducted thorough, objective due diligence. I spoke with Task Force Connect's customers, their workers, and their existing investors. I analyzed their financials with our firm's analysts. I evaluated the opportunity purely on its merits, separating my personal history from the business decision. The conclusion was unavoidable. Task Force Connect was a strong investment opportunity. They had solid fundamentals, impressive growth, and significant market potential. Rejecting the deal purely out of spite would be unprofessional and would cost Summit Ventures a valuable portfolio company. But that didn't mean I had to make it easy for Dash. I called a meeting with my partners to discuss the investment. I disclosed my history with Dash up front, explaining how he'd diluted my early investment and then disappeared. My partners were appropriately concerned. "That's problematic behavior," my senior partner Helena said. "Does it disqualify them from funding?" "Not necessarily," I replied. "But I think we need to structure this investment with protections that prevent similar behavior in the future." "What are you proposing?" Helena asked. "I want board control," I said. "Summit Ventures gets 2 board seats to Dash's 1. I want approval rights on any future fundraising that would dilute existing investors. I want comprehensive reporting requirements. And I want Dash to sign a formal acknowledgement that he mishandled his relationship with early investors and that this funding comes with heightened oversight." Helena smiled. "That's aggressive. Can we get those terms?" "If they're desperate enough for our capital, yes," I said. "And I think they are. Their other funding options have apparently fallen through based on what I'm hearing through back channels. We're their best shot at closing this round. Let's offer it and see if they accept." We sent the term sheet to Task Force Connect's lawyers 3 days later. The financial terms were standard, $20 million for a 25% stake. But the governance terms were harsh. Board control, approval rights, extensive reporting, and a required acknowledgement from Dash about past investor treatment. Dash called me directly 2 days after receiving the terms. His number appeared on my phone and I let it ring 3 times before answering. "This is Indy," I said professionally. "Indy, it's Dash," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk about these terms." "They're reasonable given your track record," I replied coolly. "You want investment capital. These are the conditions under which Summit Ventures is willing to provide it." "The governance terms are excessive," he protested. "You're asking for control of my company. I'm asking for protections that any prudent investor would require when dealing with a founder who has demonstrated questionable judgment regarding investor relations," I corrected. "You diluted an early believer without warning, Dash. You ghosted someone who trusted you. These terms ensure you can't do that to us." There was a long silence. "I know I handled that situation badly," He finally said quietly. I was young and made mistakes. I'm not that person anymore. Then signing these terms shouldn't be a problem, I said. They're only restrictive if you plan to behave the way you did before. Can we meet in person? Asked. I think we need to have a real conversation about what happened. Fine, I agreed. Tomorrow 11 a.m. at my office. Arrived exactly on time, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen when we'd dated. He'd always been so confident, so sure of himself. Now he seemed diminished, aware that he was completely at my mercy. Thank you for meeting with me, he said as we sat in my office. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For how I treated you, for disappearing, for diluting your investment without explanation. I was wrong. What changed? I asked. Why apologize now when you didn't 4 years ago? Because I was a coward then, he said bluntly. I convinced myself that business required hard decisions and that your dilution was just the cost of growth. I told myself that ending our relationship was necessary because mixing business and romance was too complicated. I made up justifications for behavior I knew was wrong. The honesty was surprising. Go on, I said. Over the past 4 years, I've thought about what I did to you constantly, he continued. Every time I pitch investors, I remember that you were the first person who believed in me. Every time I make a decision about stakeholder treatment, I think about how I treated you. It's haunted me, Indy. Not just losing you romantically, but knowing I betrayed someone who trusted me. I sat quietly, processing his words. They sounded genuine, but I'd believed was genuine before. So you're apologizing because you need my funding, I finally said. Or because you actually regret what you did. Both, he admitted. I won't lie and say I'd be here apologizing if you weren't in a position to fund my company. But the regret is real. I've become successful by most measures, but that success is tainted by knowing how I built it. By using people who believed in me. You weren't the only one, were you? I asked. Shook his head. I treated several early supporters poorly. Used their money, their connections, their trust, and then pushed them aside when I didn't need them anymore. I thought that's what successful founders did. I was wrong. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to invest, obviously, he said. But more than that, I want a chance to prove I've changed. These governance terms you're requiring, they're harsh, but they're probably what I deserve. What Task Force Connect deserves. If having you on the board with oversight authority means the company gets funding and I get a chance to demonstrate better judgment, I'll accept those terms. I studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation. All I saw was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. I'll discuss your acceptance with my partners, I said. But understand something clearly, If we invest, our relationship will be purely professional. I'm not interested in revisiting anything personal. I'm interested in generating returns for my fund and ensuring you build this company responsibly. Understand, he said. I'm not asking for personal forgiveness. I'm asking for professional trust, which I know I need to earn. The investment closed 6 weeks later. Summit Ventures transferred $20 million to Task Force Connect in exchange for 25% equity, 2 board seats, and comprehensive governance rights. I took one of the board seats myself. I wanted direct oversight of how ran the company. For the first year after our investment, I watched carefully. Every decision, every hire, every strategic pivot was scrutinized. I wasn't trying to micromanage, but I was ensuring he couldn't repeat past patterns. To my surprise, was true to his word. He consulted the board on major decisions. He treated employees and investors with respect. He built systems that protected stakeholders rather than concentrating power in his own hands. Task Force Connect grew from $30 million to $75 million in annual revenue under this new structure. We expanded to 40 cities, built strategic partnerships with major corporations, and achieved profitability ahead of projections. The company was thriving, and Dash's leadership had genuinely matured. In our quarterly board meetings, I'd watch him present with a confidence that was tempered by humility he hadn't possessed when I'd first met him. He'd acknowledge mistakes quickly, ask for input genuinely, and make decisions that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term growth. 2 years after Summit Ventures invested, Task Force Connect received an acquisition offer. A major tech company wanted to buy us for $300 million. At 25% ownership, Summit Ventures' stake was worth $75 million. My personal carried interest would translate to approximately $8 million. Not bad for a deal I'd almost rejected out of spite. The acquisition required board approval. As one of 2 Summit board members, my vote was essential. Dash requested a private meeting before the board vote to discuss the offer. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory away from the office. "This is a good offer," he started without preamble. "It's fair value, provides excellent returns for all investors, and gives Task Force Connect resources to scale globally. Are you planning to vote against it?" he asked. "I haven't decided," I said honestly. "The financial terms are attractive. But I'm curious about something." "What?" he asked. "Whether you've thought about the fact that I'm about to make $8 million from an investment in a company that once diluted my original $50,000 investment to almost nothing." "The irony hasn't escaped me," Dash said quietly. "Your original investment, if it hadn't been diluted, would be worth approximately $36 million right now based on this acquisition price. I've thought about that constantly. I can't undo what I did, Indy. I can't give you back those years or that value. But I can acknowledge that you should have been part of this success from the beginning, not just because you joined the board later." "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying that if you approve this acquisition, I'll personally transfer $5 million from my proceeds to you," he said. "Not as a legal obligation, but as an acknowledgement that you were an early believer who got screwed. It won't make things right, but it's something." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "That's a significant amount of money." "It's less than you deserve," he said. "But it's what I can afford while still maintaining enough capital to start my next venture. I don't want to build my next company on a foundation of unpaid debts." "You don't owe me anything legally," I said. "I know," Dash replied. "But I owe you morally. And I've learned that those debts matter more." The acquisition closed 3 months later. Task Force Connect was purchased for $300 million. Summit Ventures received $75 million. I personally received $8 million in carried interest plus the $5 million Dash transferred as promised. $13 million total from a situation that had started with me losing $50,000 and getting ghosted. At the closing celebration, Dash raised his glass to toast the team and investors. "I want to specifically acknowledge Indy," he said publicly. "She believed in this company before anyone else did. I failed to honor that belief and treated her poorly during Task Force's early days. Her willingness to invest again through Summit Ventures, despite having every reason to reject us, is a testament to her professionalism and judgment. I'm grateful for her oversight and guidance. This success belongs to her as much as anyone." The acknowledgement was public, generous, and years overdue. But it felt genuine in a way that mattered. After the celebration, Dash approached me privately. "I meant what I said," he told me. "You could have destroyed this deal out of spite. Instead, you evaluated it fairly and helped make it successful. That's more grace than I deserved." "You're right," I said. "It was more grace than you deserved. But I didn't invest to punish you. I invested because it was a good opportunity and because I'd learned to separate personal feelings from professional judgment. Something you failed to do 4 years ago." "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry. Again. Will. Always." I accepted his apology with the understanding that some wounds heal but leave scars that never completely fade. Would I trust Dash personally again? Probably not. Would I invest in his next company? Maybe, if the opportunity was compelling and the governance structure was strong. The experience taught me valuable lessons that changed my entire approach to venture capital. I learned that the people who take advantage of you often come back needing you when circumstances shift. I learned that professionalism sometimes requires setting aside personal hurt to evaluate opportunities objectively. Most importantly, I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction but success so complete that the person who wronged you has to acknowledge it publicly. Today, I'm a successful venture capital partner with a portfolio of high-performing investments and a reputation for being tough but fair. Dash is starting a new company with the proceeds from his acquisition. We're cordial when we cross paths at industry events, but we're not friends. Some betrayals create permanent distance, even after apologies and restitution. If this story showed you that people who ghost you often reappear when you have power they need, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about turning betrayal into leverage and using professional judgment to create opportunities from painful situations. Drop a comment about a time someone disappeared from your life and came back needing your help. Because sometimes the best outcome isn't getting even. It's building success so undeniable that the person who dismissed you has to ask for your approval, knowing you hold their future in your hands and could choose either mercy or justice. See you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.